Well, this morning was interesting. As you may have heard by now, the power went out about 15 minutes before we were supposed to start the worship service, and it didn't come back on until about, we were out at the picnic afterwards. And this was an important enough message in the life of the church that we felt like we needed to do it again. So I'm in an empty room. Lori's here running the PowerPoint, but we're just I'm going to say basically what I said this morning. One persistent theme that we find throughout the scripture is the importance of taking the long view. That is, viewing our present circumstances, today's challenges and setbacks and opportunities and successes against the backdrop of a larger context, a longer time frame, an eternal perspective. One piece of that is recognizing that when we come to know Jesus, when we enter into a relationship with Him by grace through faith, that's for life. That's something that's going to require our ongoing attention, our continuing commitment from that point forward until the Lord calls us home. If that's just a box that we checked off years ago, and maybe we wrote down the date in the front of our Bibles, and then we kind of moved on from there, and it's not really part of our daily life, that's probably good reason to question what that really was way back all those years ago. A relationship with Jesus is a daily thing, and it is for the long haul. One of my favorite, longtime favorite verses in the New Testament was in Hebrews chapter 12, where the writer exhorts us to run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Endurance. See, the Christian life, our walk with the Lord, it's not just a quick little victory jog across the soccer field. It is a long-distance race. It's a grueling marathon where there will be times when we're feeling exhausted. And there are going to be big hills that we're going to have to make up our minds to push through, drawing on His strength. Where there will be distractions, where there will be obstacles, where there will be all manner of temptation to just give up. But we're to keep running. We're to run with endurance. We're to stay focused on the finish line. Keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. See the big picture. Take the long view. For the past year, as a church family, we've been focusing together on the theme, Don't Journey Alone. God didn't design us to run this marathon by ourselves. If I can turn the hike, the journey that we've been talking about into a race or a marathon. We need to surround ourselves with others who are following the same course, who are moving toward the same goal we are, the same finish line we are. We need to be running in a pack, closely enough engaged with other people around us that we can help each other. We can encourage each other. We can challenge each other and support one another. Don't journey alone. Don't try to run this race completely solo, because that's not how God designed us to function. This morning on what we call Vision Sunday, I want to introduce the theme that we're going to be focusing on for this next year. As happens each year, this is something that came out of some ongoing conversations among the elders over the past number of months. And if I can relate it to Don't Journey Alone, what we're going to be encouraging us to do is to expand our perspective, to broaden our vision, to see beyond our own personal journey, our own personal marathon, and to recognize that there is a race to be run outside of where our own feet will tread, on parts of the race course that we may not personally see ourselves before we cross the finish line. In other words, there is a long view, there is a broad view that we must not overlook. Or I suppose it makes more sense to say that we must not underlook. Let's start here. This is 2 Timothy chapter 2. Paul writes, "The things you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, these entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." It was just barely a year ago that I preached through this letter from Paul. So you may remember, if you were here, that this is near the end of Paul's finish line. He's writing this letter from prison, and this time he's not going to get out, and he knows that. And so he's exhorting his young protege, Timothy, to take what he's learned from Paul through all these years and to keep it going. And you can identify 4 generations, if you will, here in this verse. There's Paul, and then there's Timothy and the circle of witnesses, the guys that Paul has led to Christ and mentored and discipled and developed as leaders. And then there's the ones that those guys will influence, faithful men, he calls them. Then there's another layer beyond that, Timothy's spiritual grandchildren, so to speak. And the implication is that it doesn't end there. It keeps going. And there are two ways that you can think about this, both of them absolutely legitimate, both of them completely relevant to us. One is, these are ripple effects. These are concentric circles expanding outward from Paul's life and ministry. See, Timothy and the faithful people he influences and the ones that they reach with the gospel, they're all contemporaries. They're all living at the same time. And so their faithfulness at each layer means more and more people being reached. The circle is continually expanding. The gospel is reaching wider and wider in the world, which, remember, is what Jesus commissioned his church to do. He said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. You shall be my witnesses even to the remotest part of the earth." Every tribe, every tongue, every people, every nation. And so in this sense, there are ripple effects going outward from Paul and Timothy. And the same thing needs to be true of us as we share our faith with people on our front lines, as we meaningfully partner with those who are actively engaging the unreached at the ends of the earth. But the other way to think about this, to look at this, equally important, is that these are ripple effects, not just going outward, but going forward in time, through the years, across the generations, so that the Christian faith, the message of the gospel, the health of the church will still be strong and viable long after these earliest followers of Christ have crossed the finish line, have finished their own race. Entrust these things to faithful people who will be able to teach others, who will be able to teach others, who will be able to teach others, all the way down through the centuries to our generation. And the reason that we're able to meet as a church today is because each generation over the last 2,000 plus years, or at least somebody in each of those generations, has faithfully passed it on. Now, this idea of a forward ripple, a longitudinal transmission through time, didn't start with Paul's generation. It goes back a lot further than that. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now, the context here is that the people of Israel have come out of Egypt, and they've been in the wilderness, in the desert for 40 years now. And so at this point, Moses is preparing this new generation to enter into the promised land. So here's what he says to them. This is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1. "Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, so that you may do them in the land where you are going over to take possession of it. So that," hear this part, "so that you and your son and your grandson," and that's not meant to exclude your daughter and your granddaughter, but so that you and the generations after you will fear the Lord your God, to keep all his commandments and his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. So you and your children and your grandchildren, this needs to be passed forward. Now, what's that going to look like? Jump to verse 5. Moses says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart," because that's where it has to start. You can't pass on what you don't possess. If you're not living this, they're not going to listen. "These words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall repeat them diligently to your sons," or the traditional translation here is, "you shall teach them diligently, and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you get up." In other words, for parents who know the Lord, every day, every moment, every circumstance is a classroom. It's a hands-on laboratory for passing on the faith to their children. And what a monumental task this is. What a colossal responsibility. And one in which we need to support one another in every way that we can, because teaching and training and equipping and preparing the next generation to carry on the faith is so vitally important. How important? Well, let's see how the people hearing this charge from Moses did. Moses himself reaches his own personal finish line at the end of Deuteronomy. He dies. And then Joshua, his successor, takes up the leadership. Israel moves into the promised land. They defeat their enemies. That was basically the whole book of Joshua in about 2 sentences. And here's the next book. This is Judges chapter 2, verse 7. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua. So going back to the terminology of Deuteronomy 6 that we read before, that would be you and your children who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And then skip to verse 10. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, which means now we're down to the grandchildren. And here they come. There arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals, these pagan gods of their neighbors. And it's going to go on and describe just how bad it got, just how far the people fell in just 2 generations. And that pattern, unfortunately, is going to be repeated over and over and over again throughout the rest of the Old Testament, where you'll find one judge or a priest or a king who leads the people well, and they're honoring the Lord, and they're following his law, and their hearts seem to be in the right place. But then it doesn't get passed down to the next generation. And the next generation crashes and burns, and they start serving the pagan gods of their neighbors once again. For whatever reason, they failed to pass the baton. And obviously, we don't want that to happen on our watch. So the image that has come out of the elders' conversations over the past few months, and it's going to be the focus of this next year, is that of a relay race. We've said that the Christian life is a marathon. It's something that we need to run with endurance. But the bigger picture is that the race is more than just the miles that we're going to log personally. We've been handed a baton. All of us collectively, each of us individually, have been handed a baton. And we're responsible not just to not drop it, but to faithfully hand it off. And so here's our theme for this year that we're going to keep coming back to and addressing from different angles. Run strong, pass it on. First of all, run strong. To quote Moses, the verse we looked at before, these words shall be on your heart, because that's where it has to start. And he also said, love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Never let that fade. Keep running strong until you have finished your race. Don't give up. Don't quit. Don't slow down, because you can't complete the handoff if you're no longer running hard. And so run strong. And then make sure that you pass on the baton, both outward, as we talked about a minute ago, and forward. Now, this baton that we have been handed is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And something we need to understand is that we need to grasp this. We need to understand this deeply and profoundly so that we can share it plainly and effectively. To help us with that, next Sunday I'm planning to introduce a new series of messages from the book of Romans, which includes Paul's systematic explanation of the gospel, his step-by-step exposition of our salvation, step-by-step from start to finish of what God has accomplished through Jesus Christ. I'm praying that that will give us, each of us, a stronger grip on the baton, not just so that we can keep it, but so that we can share it, hand it off, as often as we have opportunity. Now, as for passing it forward, the question that we want to keep raising this year in each of our minds is, who is there around me whose race is likely to extend beyond my own? Not that we can know that for sure, but in whose life I might play some small part in helping them to grow, to develop as a follower of Jesus, in whom I may be able to hand off something of what God has been doing in my life, something that God has invested in me, has created in me, that I can turn around and invest in them, entrust to them to carry it forward. Now, obviously, if you're a parent, or even if you're a grandparent, you're right in the thick of this already. These are daily opportunities. This is an enormous responsibility that you bear. But what we're talking about today is not just about parents, not just for parents. How can the rest of us be supporting parents here in the church family? How can we be investing in that generation of kids that they are raising? In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have some practical suggestions for ways that you can be involved in that. So this isn't just for parents, and we're not just talking about children, but rather who is there who's maybe just a few years behind you, either in terms of age or in terms of where they are on their spiritual journey, that you could come alongside. Not as someone that's got it all figured out, none of us do, but allowing God to use you to strengthen them for who knows what he may do through their lives on their road ahead. The things you've heard from me, these entrust to faithful people who will be able to teach others and keep it going until Jesus comes back. This is that long view that we want to bring to our awareness, looking beyond our own finish line and offering our time and our talents and our treasures right now in a way that God can use to keep it going long after we're gone. Now, what brought up this whole idea among the elders and triggered these conversations is the unavoidable reality that none of us is getting any younger. Or to put a finer point on it, I'm not getting any younger. I started my ministry here as pastor of Trinity Bible Church 30 years ago. I was 33 years old with 2 young kids at the time. We've got a picture, I think, here of me at that time. Make sure you notice all that hair because it's not there anymore. I was 33 then, now I'm in my 60s. And now that I'm in my 60s, it's becoming apparent, at least to me, that I won't be able to continue at the same pace indefinitely. At some point, I'm going to have to at least slow down. And so about 2.5 years ago now, I brought this up with the elders and we started talking about it. And this has been a conversation that's been going on now for more than 2 years. Sooner or later, for obvious reasons, there will need to be a transition in pastoral leadership. I'm pretty sure I don't have another 30 years in me. And so the important questions are when and how and who. As we talked about it over a series of months, we agreed that we want to do this transition when it happens in a way that is healthy, both for me and my family and for the church. One of the things that we did early on, and we've actually done it a couple of times, we read through a book together, a particular book whose subtitle is Pastoral Succession That Works. It has all kinds of guidance and principles and a lot of case studies, both positive and negative, where churches where it went well and churches where it didn't. One of the ways that doesn't generally work well is when the pastor just keeps going until suddenly, for whatever reason, he can't anymore. I mean, his tenure just ends without much warning. And then the church is left kind of scratching their collective heads and saying, okay, what do we do now? Any momentum that the church may have built up that may have been going on in the ministry is just lost just like that. Using the analogy of a relay race, that's like the runner that's carrying the baton, pulling up lame and just having to limp into the exchange zone or dropping out of the race altogether before he gets there. It works a lot better if the pastor is still running strong when he hands off the baton and the next guy is already getting up to speed. So this is a conversation that's been going on quietly among the leadership here for a couple of years. But we wanted to go ahead and bring all of you into the loop today because we are going to be beginning a process in the coming months. And I'll talk more about that process in just a minute. But that process will at some point identify Trinity's next pastor, someone who will be able to lead and feed and shepherd this flock, hopefully for the next 20 or 30 years. Now, we don't know how long that search process will take. We're committed to getting the right person in here. It could be as early as next summer. It could be a year or even a couple of years after that. My plan, though, at that point, once the new guy is here, is to retire, but not really go away. Kim and I don't really have any magic place that we can retire to. This is our home. This is our family. And so our plan is to stay on as part of the body. We'll probably take some time off before we do this, but we'll stay on as part of the body and continue to use our gifts any way that we can, as we hope each of you will as well, in support of the new pastor, in support of the mission that we share together, that we're already on right now. But with this out in the open, it also allows us to give you some additional context for what Mark shared a couple of weeks ago about his transition. One handoff scenario that would seem like a no-brainer in our situation where we have a lead pastor and an associate pastor is for Mark just to step into into my role when I'm ready to retire. And that was one of the options on the table from the very beginning. At some point in the discussion, over the course of several months, all of the elders, all of us, more or less independently came to a consensus that Mark's gifts and strengths and his wiring, so to speak, they're all very well fitted for the kind of position that he's held here at Trinity for the last 13 years, where he's sharing the responsibilities of ministry, where he's a key player on the team, but not so much to be in the lead role as the point man, the primary communicator week in and week out. And so having come to agreement on that, until sometime this past spring, I think our assumption was that Mark would just continue on as our associate pastor, which would provide a great layer of continuity in the leadership. It made a whole lot of sense, and our search then would be for someone new to step into the lead spot. Now, one thing that was always in the background was a growing concern on the part of Mark and Elisa, both of them actually, about their aging parents down in Pennsylvania. And so there was always going to be the possibility that at some point they might have to leave Trinity in order to move closer to their parents to take care of them. That was sort of in the background. It hadn't gotten to the point where it was imminent. What happened in the spring was this, and please bear with me, this gets a little tedious, a little businesslike, but we felt it's important for you to know the whole story. Sometime in the past year, the elders who aren't on staff, who are responsible for sorting out decisions about payroll for the pastors, Mark and I don't have a voice in that, and appropriately not, but those guys realized that we have been undercompensating Mark for a while now. I mean, his salary was at an appropriate level, but we hadn't really been adequately factoring in the cost of health insurance. How we missed that is that for the last 20 plus years, I haven't needed health benefits from the church because my wife is an educator here in the school district and we've always had good health coverage through her. Somehow we missed that calculation back in 2008 when we added the associate pastor position and we called Mark. And he hasn't had the advantage that I've had of having health coverage from elsewhere. And so the three elders handling this kind of thing, that's Tom and Phil and Nick, made adjustments in this current budget, the one that started in July, to try to bring that up to par. And Phil, you may remember, in June shared that with all of us. That's why there was an 8% increase in this year's budget. But in the process, the guys started looking at what that would mean whenever my successor is named, because we're going to need to be prepared to provide health insurance for him and his family. And so ultimately what came out of that was a very difficult conclusion that given the size of our church and given the shape of our budget over the years, we really can't afford 2 full-time pastors moving forward, not if we're going to provide for them fairly. I mean, we could try. We could hope that we grow enough to expand the budget, but we decided that's really kind of kicking the can down the road, and it would make it tough on the new pastor coming into a situation that's a little unsure financially. So Mark was brought into that conversation, I believe it was in late May, and we committed to giving him a full year to finish up his ministry here at Trinity and to begin to sort out what the Lord may have for him next. Also committed to providing well for him and his family through this transition. I mean, he and Elisa have served here faithfully for 13 years, so we owe that to them. Now, as it happens, and as you know by now, that transition has developed more quickly than we had anticipated. Mark and Elisa decided that they need to go ahead and sell their house up here while the real estate market is favorable. And as Mark shared a few weeks ago, Elisa has already started a new position, a teaching position down in New Jersey, because August is prime time for hiring in education. Plus, they didn't want to have to move Hannah in the middle of the school year. So right now, Mark is here in New Hampshire getting the house ready, while most of his family is down there living with his parents until everything gets settled. And one thing that's not yet settled is what Mark is going to do once his house sells and he rejoins his family. He's been looking for ministry positions in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. That can be a very slow process under any circumstances, and so far there hasn't really been anything to get excited about. And so that would be an area that we could be praying for him. Now, here's the process and the timeline that lies ahead. Over the next few months, we're going to be getting ourselves organized for this search for our next pastor. We're going to be putting together a team to join with the elders for this task. Some of the things the team will be doing throughout the fall is we'll need to hammer out a job description. We'll need to develop a profile of the kind of person that we're looking for. We're going to need to work out the procedures for connecting with and evaluating potential candidates. We'll write up a profile of the church to give them an idea of what we're about, what we're like, who we are, so that they can make a determination whether they even want to apply. And then, assuming we've got all that ready to go, in January, we plan to start posting the position and inviting inquiries and receiving resumes. And we'll see where the Lord leads us from there. I've read that the average search process for a pastor ranges anywhere from 6 to 8 months on the short end to as much as a couple of years, and so we may need to be patient. But we'll plan to keep you informed, give you updates along the way, and we'll continue to ask for your prayers because, I mean, let's be honest, this is a pretty big deal. And this is the first time this church has had to do this, at least on this level, for 30 years at this point. These are all some pretty significant transitions for us as a church. Some of them already underway with having to say goodbye to the Andersons. Others of them taking shape perhaps a little bit slower over the next year or two. And while there are clearly changes coming, and we need to be prepared for that, we need to embrace that. But one thing that hasn't changed and won't change is our shared mission. We will always be about the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. The Great Commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself in practical ways. Make disciples of all the nations. Pass it on, both outward and forward. Our core mission will stay the same. And we will continue to need all of us to be fully engaged in the life and ministry of the church. Our strength and our health as we transition toward the future here at Trinity depends not primarily on the person standing up here. It's a key role, for sure. But it depends really on all of us. And we need you to be a part of that. Let me pray before we close this out. Lord, thank you that you are in control, that you hold the future. You know the future that we can't see. We ask for your guidance, for your leadership, for your wisdom in the process that lies ahead. We ask for your continued blessings on this church. And I pray that you would work in each of our hearts to help us to be faithful at holding on to the baton and handing it off to those around us. Help each of us to run strong and to be part of handing it on, passing it on. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. If you have questions, we'd encourage you to talk with one of the elders. You know how to reach out to us. I'm sure there are some things that I haven't addressed here, but we would rather you talk to us rather than speculating or trying to fill in the blanks on your own. We would be happy to be transparent with you and to share everything that we can. Thanks for tuning into this, and we hope to see you next Sunday.